Okay, well now you guys can watch. We're on slide 8. Sorry, whoever watches this later for a study. Okay, let's watch the video. Thankfully, homosexuality is not listed in the DSM as a disorder anymore. The trajectory of how this became not a disorder is incredibly interesting, and an amazing piece of advocacy of what one person can do as far as language and how that changed over time, and that obviously it's normal to be gay. Let's look at this. This is the Kinsey scale test. Are y'all seeing what is written on the bottom about the Kinsey scale? Are y'all able to see it? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've never felt it before. Now you guys should know about it. I guess what? Your book. That's cool. Never. Ooh, of course. I don't know. Okay, there's one of them.
Are y'all seeing the questions? Okay, good. It's just hard to see on this computer, I guess.
Somebody tell me. 我觉得我根本不会考虑参加这个班，因为我都是男的。我也是。I just don't watch porn. 在对的情况下。No. Yeah. I think I am. I'll get them.
Well, it's so hard to see.
They're so fast.
I know. Are y'all seeing the questions though about sexuality and the differences? I'm sexually submissive. Okay, so it's a bunch of questions, hopefully that you're able to see.
Let me do it again.
That puts you on a spectrum of sexuality and interest. Why did it do that? And that really, I think, also pushed the movement forward as far as an understanding that anywhere on that range of sexuality is normal and shouldn't be stigmatized or pathologized as it was previously to 1970. I mean, the Kinsey scale, as you saw, came out in 1948, but it took a long time to actually change the DSM. They had multiple changes before what we see today as far as how they were looking at homosexuality. So they had like small changes as far as wording was concerned, as far as, you know, the engagement of sex, as far as the just like the thought process about having some same-sex relations, and slowly but surely they moved it to just totally being out of the DSM at all. So yeah, any questions on that? I've got a really good podcast if you're very interested in this. It's oh man, it was This American Life, and it was like the title something about like it's all in a word, or like something about like language and the importance of words. And you can watch the whole history on this. Okay. So what do y'all think? Does sex sell? Do we think there's an effect on this in our world, as far as how much we see sex just in our day-to-day lives, in magazines and commercials, on TV and movies, on bags of chips, whatever it is, sex is everywhere. And, you know, the way that sex is being represented in materials, I think very much affects, you know, the way we think and feel psychologically. But now let's move into the disorders. Again, I do not mean to pathologize. I think that you can see in any of these a great variation, and you can think of it as a spectrum, that there is definitely a healthy amount of, you know, a desire for some pain or desire, I don't know if I want to say suffering, because that's kind of an extreme form, but you can see there's normality within all of these, I guess is just what I want to hit on. So the paraphilic disorders are considered widely pathological because of the distress seeking and how extreme the distress can be, and how potentially dangerous the distress can be. A lot of times there's an abnormal target of the sexual attraction, and that abnormal target can be dangerous in nature. There's also unusual courtship behaviors that could also be overly aggressive. And then there's that desire for pain, which again, like I mentioned, can be within the normal range. But if there's like severe trauma to the body that's being sexualized, so much so that they could potentially need to go to the hospital, or a serious injury can occur, that is within the pathological realm, because it is inflicting so much pain potentially on their own body or the body of others. And it could go either way as far as what's arousing to the individual with the paraphilic disorder. Any questions on that? Again, the line is definitely kind of hard to draw, but I think what's easier to conceptualize is that dangerous, like how painful it is. What are the after effects or lasting effects, if there are lasting effects to what's engaged in during the arousal period or during actual sexual behaviors. So with paraphilic disorders, again, you want to be focusing on that like causing of harm, and how harmful is it? Like a little rug burn or even a little bruise is not what we're really talking about here. We're talking about potentially like bloodletting or broken bones or concussions or strangulation, that is like quite serious, and like you can even see that if it went a little bit too far, like someone could really get hurt. And you know, it's not a need to cause harm either to the individual or others, but it's like that interest in it. Like a lot of times they're not like trying to seriously hurt someone. You know, they don't mean to, you know, kill someone, hopefully not. But it's that like psychological like urge, and that there's something arousing about it. And then, you know, it's that unusual sexual interest and the cause of harm to self or others. Again, it's really about that harm that you want to hone in on. Okay, we also see a number of different paraphilic disorders. So we have fetishism, and that is the unusual arousal from a non-living object. Again, it can be used in a potentially painful way to the human or the individual who has this arousal. It also can be within, you know, a normal range of behavior if there isn't, you know, any harm being done to themselves or others, and it isn't, you know, manipulating others in a negative way. What happens, unfortunately, with a lot of fetishes, though, is that the person who maybe has their like feet fetishized by another person, they end up feeling very uncomfortable, maybe manipulated, maybe abused, maybe feeling like harassed. Then it's getting within abnormal behavior because it has that negative effect. What also can be fetishized are like different objects, different animals, different like maybe pictures of things that people are very aroused by. There's a wide range. Then there's transvestic fetishism, which is arousal by cross-dressing. And again, I think that is, I think in today's day and age, unfairly pathologized, but it is currently pathologized in that, you know, someone could dress as a different gender or sexual identity than their own, and that can be very arousing to people. Again, I think you can really see that within the normal range, but currently it is one of the options. Pedophilia, definitely, I think everyone agrees, far out of the normal range. No one is thinking that that is normal behavior or that that is ethical or allowed, and that is arousal by children. And obviously, when someone engages in that, it is incredibly illegal, incredibly dangerous, causes incredible harm. Even, you know, if it's just looking at pictures on the website, it's very, very dangerous. That's like unethical, illegal, and endorsing, you know, child sex slavery and really far without that normal range. Voyeurism, so that's like that peeping Tom looking in on people who do not know that they're being looked in on. Also far outside of the normal range because you don't have that consent. So again, very unethical. We do see that as a disorder, not something that we can see maybe some normality in. Exhibitionism. So this also, it's, I think the question of like, the line is there consent going on? Like if you are someone who is an exhibitionist and goes to a nudist colony where everyone is consenting adults and they are, you know, saying that they are okay with seeing other naked bodies, that is within the normal range of behavior. But if you are someone who is an exhibitionist and does this to non-consenting people, that definitely causes a lot of harm to others and is seen definitely outside the range of normality, as that's, you know, seriously causing harm to others. That's sexual harassment. The next one we have frotteurism. I don't know if I'm saying frotteuristic. Frotteuristic, anyone heard that one before? It's the arousal by rubbing genitals against non-consenting persons. So also, you know, I think you see this a lot of like subways and public transportation. That is outside of the realm of normality as well, because that is sexual abuse, sexual harassment, potentially verging on rape as far as how much you engage in this or how far you engage in this. So again, very far outside of the realm of normality, it's illegal. Then there's also sexual sadism, which I do think is a range, still currently pathologized, but there is definitely a range of normality when there is consent, and there's not too much harm as well. That for people who gain arousal by giving pain to others, that if the person who is receiving the pain is, you know, a consenting individual, that would be the sexual masochist, the person who gets arousal from pain itself. Again, you know, if you're not intentionally causing too much pain, you know, it's within like a safe range, and that again, they're both consenting adults, and they, you know, have practices in place for that safety. That is within the normal range, but then when it goes too far, when there is, you know, maybe a lack of consent, when there is, you know, pain that could be very damaging or, could be long lasting or that they could go to the hospital. That is not within the range of normality. And then, sexual masochism, very similarly, it's just the arousal by pain to themselves, like they are receiving the pain. Okay, I went through a bunch of them. Which ones can I repeat for y'all? Yes, go ahead, Tristan.
So for
And
the
then Ruth.
last two, would that or at least for the first one, is that kind of where
Sadism.
Christian Grey, like that, kind
Yeah.
of scenario? Okay.
That's I think real soft. I've read those books, definitely within the normal range, I would say. He never seriously hurts her. She's consenting. I think a lot of people who are in sadist and masochist subcultures would say that's pretty soft. And yes, definitely within the normal range. Ruth?
I took a human sexuality class at Collin,
Mm-hmm.
and my professor broke the class up into groups, and he would assign a topic that we would each have to debate,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't get to choose your topic. And
Mhm.
you didn't get to choose what side you wanted to debate for.
Okay.
And one of the topics was pedophilia. And,
Oh my god.
I was so glad I wasn't in that
Mm-hmm.
group,
What did
but,
people say?
They basically try to say that if they didn't act on it, it was okay. I wasn't convinced.
Oh my god.
but, yeah.
Not according to DSM.
Well, isn't
Yeah.
pedophilia starting it's not something they can control about?
No,
themselves?
definitely not.
So it's,
I mean, I think a lot of people who are pedophiles don't want to be that way.
Yeah.
I would say that they see that their urges are wrong and that if they engage in the behaviors, it is unethical. They do see that right and wrong. But it's not normal, not within normal behavior. Yeah. I guess, I feel bad for those who have those urges. I really do. I think it's a mental disorder, obviously. So good for them if they don't act on it and don't look at any pictures, because I do think even if you are looking at a picture of it, the United States thinks this, even if you just look that up, you are perpetuating child abuse. So it's unethical. But yeah, can't believe that professor did that. Did that go over well, or
In the end, I think,
it turned out okay?
yeah, he was a good professor.
He was good. Okay, that's good. Ooh, I feel like that'd be a tough class to
I know
teach.
there was a professor in Collin that got fired for child porn. So
Yeah, it'd been funny if it was him.
I was just thinking that. Was it your professor? But you know who that person
I
is?
don't know who it was, but I know my human sexuality teacher said the previous one got fired.
Of that class of human sexuality?
It wasn't my professor, but she said the previous one got fired.
So one of that class. The previous.
Yeah.
The sick, disgusting irony. That is nasty. And I feel bad for the students who had to learn from that person.
On the
Ew.
last day of class,
Yes.
he also had an optional day where they watched porn together and they analyzed it. I didn't know because it was optional, but
Is that what?
legal?
That can't be. Yeah, is that?
We had to sign it
There's no way.
Is that legal?
No idea.
Yeah, at the beginning of the semester, we had to sign a form that we're gonna talk about all this stuff, and if you're uncomfortable, don't be in the class.
But you can have minors that take classes at Collin now. 'cause you can
Yeah, you
do
do.
it. So legally, you can't, I don't know how you would.
Well, it's optional, she said. So
Yeah,
maybe
but
that's
I'm
how they
saying,
got around that. I do not know.
What-
There was this crazy story that was going around. I'll tell you when I was in college. So that was
You get.
a while ago now.
No, I meant it's
Uh,
it's encouraging them to do it, so you can't really say no if it's giving credit. That's not.
Wait, you got credit for it, or was it just
No.
totally out of
No.
interest?
You could bring popcorn and just.
Oh my god. Oh my word. Okay, so one even crazier. I don't know if y'all, because y'all were probably most of y'all in high school while I was in college. But this was it didn't happen at my university, but there was one class, I do not know how this was allowed, but it was a theater and sexuality class. A woman stripped down naked and masturbated in front of an entire classroom.
What university did you go to?
It wasn't my university.
Oh.
It wasn't my
Oh,
university.
sorry.
It just like while I was in college, it was talked about a lot because it happened at another college.
Did they analyze like how they did it or what? Or just like
Yeah, no, they were all like it was supposed to be like an academic.
interesting.
It was an academic. Y'all can Google it. I'm definitely not Googling that for y'all. It was like
Couldn't have been
a pretty good. No, it was not. It was on the northeast. It was like a theater. It was a theater class. I'm pretty sure. If you find it, let me know. It was a while ago. I was in college, 2008, 2012. So it was a while ago. But I think she also like she did a lot of things. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, I just saying, I had
Yeah,
a
I
human
wouldn't do it.
sexuality class at UNT and it was totally normal.
Isn't
So, just
Good.
so you don't be
it
swayed
Dr.
from
Barnett
taking
who teaches that most of the
it.
time?
No, it was,
That doesn't work here anymore, I don't think.
Oh, he
I think he switched universities.
left.
I think the last time I had him was like 2 semesters ago.
Oh, really? I didn't even know he
was like,
left.
yeah,
He doesn't teach
I
grad
think he
students.
goes to, I think he teaches at UT.
Oh, wow. Good for him.
I forgot his name, but I think he was.
Okay.
Like,
It was normal. No harassment or abuse happened in the classroom.
His name is Nick.
Yes.
Yeah.
They started with a D, his first name started.
The one who was a pedophile?
No.
Oh, the pedophile from Colin was named John Creech.
Oh.
I just looked it up.
Sounds like Creed.
Does sound like a creep. Well, I hope he's rotting in jail.
Okay.
His name was Dalton Thornton. Is that who it was?
Oh, I know John.
Yeah.
I don't even
No.
maybe John.
Oh.
Okay. All right, let's get back to
really don't
I knew this would happen to me. Okay, so more about those paraphilic details as far as the disorder is concerned. We just went over. Oh, did anyone? We got off a little. Does anyone need me to repeat any of these? What they are?
Voyeurism.
Peeping Tom. It's like when you look in on someone who's not consenting, and that's actually part of the arousal is that they're not consenting and they don't know that they're being peeped on. Yes, Courtney.
The exhibition.
That's like you get aroused by like showing yourself naked. It's like that indecent exposure. But not to like pathologize those who are in nudist colonies who are, all consenting or, naked beaches, like all consenting. You could be aroused, but
It's like someone like
This is like-
flashes you or something.
yes, someone flashes you, you like jump in front of someone, they're not consenting, it's sexual harassment. Yes, Samantha.
So like on voyeurism, like, because you mentioned the lady who like had people like watch her, would that be considered voyeurism or no? Like you,
Those people
like
are
when people
consenting.
watching you.
Oh, wanting people to watch you is more exhibitionism.
Okay.
And she might have been. I mean, she said she was a theater person. I remember that part of the story. But she might have been an exhibitionist. She might have been very aroused by having so many people watch her. Yeah. But the voyeurism is the real, like, it's the peeping part. It's like that,
watching somebody.
that's not consenting. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So just more on these specifically. Again, I think a lot of these are unfairly pathologized, especially, as far as the fetishism is concerned, that when there's, consent, when there, is no harm being done to yourself or others, it's just important to note that it can be erotic in a healthy, normal way, as long as there's consent and no harm. Also, transvestic disorder, I think is, highly, highly problematic, because now, the word that you can see in there is really derogatory in nature. So I really don't think that's fair, but it's still there. And then also voyeuristic disorder. Again, if it's like couples engaging in consenting sex and like watching each other get undressed, it's a very different story than illegally standing outside of someone's window, and doing something like that. So, important to note. Yes, Courtney.
So this is just like something that like I've noticed in the book. I don't know like if you guys like read like this whole chapter, but like for all of these, like it's saying like a man can only do this to a woman. Like for voyeuristic heuristic, that's how you say it. It says if he has reoccurrent intense sexual arousal, fantasies, urges, behaviors involving the observation of unsuspecting females. So like, it's kind of like insisting that only a man can do
And that's
so.
definitely not the case, yeah. I mean, we do see more often, especially from voyeurs, we do see more men engage in that than women. But 100% we do see these across gender identities. Good point.
They need a new,
New book.
they need
What?
a new edition of this book.
A less sexist book, I'm with you, Courtney. Any other thoughts or questions on this?
Why are some of these like still disorders? Like it seems like a transvestism is just like a, ooh, I don't like that, I'm gonna make it a disorder. Like that doesn't sound like you could really harm anyone by doing that.
I agree. I think change is slow. I think change is political, and it's psychiatrists who write the DSM, and they tend to be working out of a medical model, obviously, because they go to medical school, and they have more of a likelihood to pathologize than psychologists do, but psychologists work out of the DSM. Yeah, I think change is slow. I think that's my only answer, unfortunately. I mean, look how long it took to get homosexuality out of the DSM, you know? And homosexuality isn't even really a PC term anymore. You really should be saying gay or lesbian. Yeah, you're good. So, yeah, it's tough. I don't know why. I mean, if you listen to that great podcast, I can find it for y'all. It's like small steps and changes make big changes. But yeah, it's slow. Okay, and then there's more. So the exhibitionist disorder, again, you have to be looking at the inappropriateness, you know, if there's no consent. But if there is consent, you know, and the person's like, yeah, I want you to surprise me later and just jump out naked and it's gonna be great, like, that's okay. And then, you know, proteristic disorder as well. You know, if the person's like cool with you rubbing themselves on you and like on them, if there's consent, you know, that's fine. That could be enjoyable for everyone involved. But it's about the consent, you know, that is what makes it abnormal. It's the consent and the harm. So don't go to extremes and don't do anything without consent. It's the bottom line. And then you'll be not meeting criteria for these disorders. Okay, so again, you know, looking more, the sadism and masochism, same thing. Again, you know, when there's consent, when there's boundaries, when there's clear, you know, safe words, I'm sure y'all have heard of safe words that are being used. There's measures to keep everyone safe and out of harm's way and still having a good time. Even if it is, you know, like being beaten or being bound, you know, if it's not like too painful, if it's like within their appreciation or what they enjoy and like it doesn't hurt too much, it doesn't commit too much pain or too much lasting damage, it can really be seen within a normal range. Again, the key is consent though. So, like what you mentioned, Courtney, we do see these more often for men, but again, we do see it with females as well, but nearly, I would say most, great majority are men. We also see, you know, potentially as causal factors for having any of these paraphilic disorders would be that they have a higher sex drive and that they are more dependent on visual sexual imagery, that they get maybe more aroused than the average person. And what we also do note is that if you have one paraphilic disorder, it severely increases your likelihood of having another paraphilic disorder. So, anyone want to share who hasn't shared yet today? Why are paraphilia so much more common among men? Is society playing a role? Are there double standards? Dun, dun, dun. Everyone participated today? Yes. That's good. Does anyone want to participate? No? Well, I think there is. I definitely think there is. I think society plays a huge role in how much we project onto men that they should be, you know, obsessed with sex, want it all the time, as far as, you know, their masculine role and as far as what sexuality is and how they should be, you know, the more dominant character in sexual experiences. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I can't remember if we talked about it this class or if it was in the marital adjustment class. But yeah, men are supposed to be completely like just all knowing about sex and like willing to initiate everything, like just really being dominant about it. So I think society definitely plays a role.
Thank you. I agree. And I think Courtney agrees too. She was picking up on those double standards. Okay. Okay, true or false? Other than sex offenders, most people with paraphilias do not seek treatment. True. Why?
Because they don't talk about.
It's uncomfortable, it's a little awkward,
And they might not get arrested for it.
and it's probably not creating too much of a problem in their lives, right? Like, probably really tough to find someone. And then, if they are, they're getting arrested and they're like not getting treatment. Like, for people who do this kind of stuff, like, it's not like the jails where it's like, oh, we're gonna talk, have group therapy and work this out. No, it's like you're in jail. Yeah. Good points. It is true. Okay, gender dysphoria is the new term used in the DSM-5 in place of the previous disorder, gender identity disorder. So gender dysphoria is the childhood diagnosis for individuals who have a different sexual identity than their gender identity. We do still have this as a pathologized disorder, and it is seen, you know, in childhood. It cannot be given until the age of 6 or 7. And that is because of the developmental differences that we see. It's actually like quite normal for like 4 or 5-year-olds to be like, I'm a girl today. And you ask them, why are you a girl? And you're like, the kid's like, I haven't had my hair cut in a long time. And it's just because like their hair's a little bit longer. Or they're like, well, I'm a boy today. And they're like, why are they a boy? Because I'm a superhero. I'm Spider-Man and Spider-Man's a boy. That is all normal behavior, not pathologized. It's expected. Kids just don't understand gender yet, don't understand their own gender identity. Maybe you can think of it like as you were a kid, or you know, your friends or siblings, like little boys like love to get in high heels and clock around like their mommies or their daddies, you know, and like, you know, little girls love to put on Spider-Man or Batman outfits, and like that should not be pathologized. It's just very typical of that developmental stage. But within 6 or 7, a child should be understanding what gender identity is and that there's differences between those who identify as men and those who identify as women. And they should be able to also understand that like you're pretty much always gonna be that way. That like if you feel like a man today, you're gonna feel like a man tomorrow. If you feel like a woman today, you're gonna feel like a woman tomorrow. And it's pretty stagnant in that. That's also something that like developmentally kids have to like get, because until that point, it's like, well, when it won't be surprised to hear like a kid, you say like, when I grow up, I want to be a girl. And it's like, they just don't get it yet. It's not like they really want to change their gender identity. They just are little. But it is a very interesting disorder. Let's look at the video.
My name is Travis. I'm 35 years old. My family name was Elizabeth. So I grew up in a small town in Maine. I was such a tomboy as a kid. And my parents thankfully just let me do that, although my mother still was trying to get me to wear dresses for just random, holidays, I guess, when I had to look conventional, was the word that she used, conventional. I didn't like to wear dresses, they weren't very practical. It was the tree that I wanted to go to climb, and that would really get annoying with that. But for the most part, they let me have short hair, that I rolled around in the dirt, basically, and I had a little brother, which was really fun, because we got to play together, but my sister was a total nerd, smart, early person. I mostly had male friends, and we, ride bikes and, walking around in the woods. I didn't really start becoming friends with girls until around junior high, when boys were not so interested in playing with girls anymore. It was much more gendered, I guess. I never really thought about whether or not I would ever grow out of my tomboy identity. I mean, it was definitely hard to picture myself as a grown woman. I could never see it. I could never imagine looking like my mother. I have 2 gay aunts, and one of them's pretty butch, but I saw her enough to know that if I were to be an adult woman, that that's probably what I would be like. And she's a carpenter at Ryan Carly and used to be a goalie for a women's hockey league. So a lot of things that I really identified with, and I really liked her and I wanted to be like her. I don't think I ever thought that I would become feminine. Thankfully, I didn't know that I wasn't that normal until I started getting social cues. And I remember I had my parents had some friends over once, and they commented on me like, oh, little girls shouldn't sit like that. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that I shouldn't be doing something a certain way. And that really stuck with me. My parents had never done that to me. I decided to cut my hair off when I was in 6th grade. I just wanted short hair because it seemed easier to play sports with. It just wouldn't get in the way. And then I started having problems getting mistaken for a boy. And that's probably when I started realizing that I looked weird. I remember, hanging out with some skate kids, and some kid came up and asked this other kid, like, why is that guy wearing a bra? Because I had like a white shirt on and seeing my bra through it, and just thinking, like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Like, this is just so embarrassing, because I wanted to be invisible. Like, I hated the fact that I even had to wear a bra. It's just so gross to me, horrible. So puberty was really hard and awkward, and I got sort of, uglier and more awkward, and I got really tall and gained a lot of weight. People were really like, wow, you're fat and ugly. And it really hurt me, of course, as a kid. I was so angry, and I don't know if it was because of what was happening to me. I'm sure that there was an effect, all this external information that was happening must have had an effect on me. Just sort of like, you look weird, you're not normal, you're not being a little girl. I was acting out. My parents tried to get me to go to therapy. I hated it so much, but after that, something happened to me. I wanted to be different, and so cheesy, but I bought a pair of Chuck Taylors and joined the drama club, and all of a sudden I was like alternative, and it felt so natural, and I cut my hair again, and had friends, and felt good about myself again. And that, I feel like that really changed my whole outlook on life. I had a high school boyfriend, and he was also in the drama club. He was actually a lead in a lot of the plays that we did. One day he just said, wow, you're really beautiful. And it was the first person that absolutely told me that I was beautiful besides my mother. And I couldn't believe it. And then, later found out that, he had a crush on me. And no one had ever had a crush on me. And I certainly didn't really have crushes on other people besides, Jonathan Knight from Kid on the Block, because it wasn't part of my reality to actually like anybody. He was funny and different and also really weird and flamboyant. Got along really well. So I eventually graduated and I went to college. I just so happened to be at the one school that a lot of the gays around Maine end up in for some weird reason. Even though I still didn't yet really know that I was gay. I think I said that I was bi, but I never really explored it. I saw myself in them, and I was watching more and more films starring lesbians and dykes, and started to build on yes, this is who I am. Thank God I've been searching for someone like me, and that was the closest I found. And so I decided that I was probably gay, even though those initial attraction towards women it didn't feel sexual, but I was still attracted to them in the sense that I wanted to be with them. I wanted to be a lesbian. I was desperate to be gay, and that's what I did. I was really excited to come out as gay. It felt like I had found my community. It felt like I had been searching my whole life for it. And everything about lesbian culture, I wanted to be a part of it.
Okay. So that is one person's story, but one person's story is one person's story. And it looks different, I would say, for everyone as far as their trajectory, as far as their arousals, as far as their interests, as far as their identities, many, many different things. It often looks different for the boy-sexed children and girl-sexed children. For girl-sexed children, gender dysphoria is often treated or seen as much more normal than for boy-sexed children, or male-sexed children, I guess I should say. Why do y'all think that might be? That for girls, it seemed much more within the normal range to have a lot more gender identities that sway male than for boys who have gender identities that sway female. Does anyone have any guesses for why that is? Courtney?
I think it's just like your family life, like the way that like your child rearing, like, because for boys you're taught like you have to be masculine and you have to be strong, and like if you're doing that then you're like a sissy and like that type of like mentality. So I feel like for girls it's just like, oh, you'll grow out of it, like you're just like this because you know you're little, and for boys it's just like more of a
pathology.
Like,
this is a problem.
Yeah.
Those female characteristics are seen much more negatively than male characteristics, I think, overall in society, that they're less advantageous, I guess. I think that's a big one. What we also see is that for both boys and girls in different studies on gender dysphoria, we find that half had homosexual tendencies, with the adult outcome for boys being more likely that eventually they will identify as gay, and then for girls the adult outcome is more mixed in that they could be interested in both those who identify as men and those who identify as women. But only a few small studies have been shown to prove this instance. But again, you kind of also see a lot of sexual attraction that could be, not so much on the binary, but could be very fluid for both young boys and young girls. And then it's just the later outcomes in life that we see differences as far as sexual orientation is concerned. What we also see is that Western cultures have a higher likelihood of stigmatizing any of this gender dysphoria that we see, and that there's a lot of non-Western cultures that really, I don't want to say like take pride in, but are much more accepting or value it much more, where some people have more fluid gender identities. We see that in a number of non-Western cultures. And then a number of treatment modalities are quite interesting to note, because it kind of depends on whether or not you're pathologizing this behavior. So if the treatment is coming out of a place where it is pathologized, as it is seen as something that's very abnormal and is not healthy for that little child, the therapy could be trying to bring their identities together. That, you want to try to act more like a boy, try to act more like a girl,
that treatment is now seen as incredibly unethical because it does not work. And now more is treatments that would, lessen hormones, give hormones to little boys, or give potentially testosterone to girls, but it can affect growth and it can have, some physical side effects. So it definitely has to be done in conjunction with both, a medical professional, a psychiatrist, and a psychologist monitoring those symptoms, because taking shots can definitely affect growth. So, again, the term transsexuals is what's used in the book. That is not a very PC term now. It is definitely not what we use as far as like our nomenclature and what we like to use. It's individuals who identify as trans is the proper term, but that is what we still have as far as the DSM is concerned, as far as textbooks are concerned. Yes.
Earlier, you also said like the word homosexual wasn't like very PC anymore. But why is in my personality class you mentioned that too, but I don't understand like why that's changed exactly.
Like, why is it not?
Because you would still consider somebody else who's like straight heterosexual.
I don't know why it's not seen as PC.
Yeah.
I just know that's not the preferred terminology.
Yeah.
I think it's because it's often used in a derogatory way.
Okay.
But you could kind of get many words that are used in a derogatory way. Like, is it inherent in the word or is it inherent in the meaning? I think because the meaning is what we're using in like technical medical terms, that's why they're still using homosexual and transsexual. Yeah. But I think when, working with someone or just talking in the regular world, you maybe want to be a little more sensitive to people's feelings. So that's why, you would use LGBT, whatever it is, or, individuals who are trans. But I don't know why those words shift or who decides that.
Yeah. I just didn't know when it changed.
When it changed, yeah. I think the homosexual shift happened, honestly, quite recently. Probably around 5 years ago when I started graduate school is when I think that shift started changing. And then individuals who identify as trans, I would say probably even more recently. Very, very recent shifts. Yeah, okay. So, important to differentiate between sexual identity and gender identity because they are two different things. So when you're talking about sexual identity, that is what you can think of as far as transsexual. So you can have someone who has gender dysphoria, does not identify with their sex given at birth, identifies with a different gender, but then in the typical sense of heterosexual, as far as being attracted to people who are different from you, right? You can still have that identity. Does that make sense? You would still be sexually attracted. Let's say you are someone who has a sex assigned at birth as male, then you identify as a trans person, you transition to female, and you share with others that your gender identity is female, but then you could still be someone who is attracted to other females. So that would be different. And then it would be feminine for homosexual, transsexuals, it would be feminine men attracted to men, and then women trapped in a man's body. So again, it would be this would be someone who, feminine men, so someone who has a sex identified as a male when they are born, and then they are attracted to other men. Okay? So look at the sex based off of birth, I guess, and then look at what they are sexually attracted to, and that's how you could place either the sexual identity of homosexual or in this one that I mentioned as heterosexual. And then we have finally the autogenephilic transsexuals. And that's a tough one to say. But those are those who have some paraphilic characteristics. as far as their arousals and as far as their expression of their gender identity and their potential sexual arousal when they're thought of being a different identity, or that they see others as a different gender identity than the sex they were given at birth. So they're particularly aroused by that cross, or that difference, or that shift, I guess. Does that make sense? Yeah, really? All of y'all got that? Oh, I said it in kind of weird way. Okay. We do also see that there are very low estimates of autogynephilic transsexuals. That as far as the general populations, the estimates are quite small, but we do have higher incidence, that there's more individuals who identify as trans, whether that's hetero or homosexual trans individuals. We see just a lot more of those. Okay, so as far as treatment is concerned, again, it very much is based on how you are pathologizing this. Like I mentioned, treatment that tries to help people, and I say help, it's not really helpful, but trying to make people match their gender identity to their sexual identity is incredibly inefficient. It's like really not effective. Psychotherapy is usually not effective. And then what people try once they see that is a hormone treatment. So for maybe men who would like to be seen more as women, that their gender identity is a woman, they would take more hormones. Or for women who would like to be seen as men, who are trans in that way, could also take testosterone. And then finally, we do see that surgical sex reassignment is actually what's most effective for the comorbid symptoms that often come with gender dysphoria. That for people with gender dysphoria, they're often very depressed, potentially very anxious, potentially very stressed out, have a lot of very negative comorbid symptomatology stemming from the fact that they are not able to present themselves as the way that they feel. And when they are better able to, whether that's with hormone treatment or with sexual reassignment surgery, they do experience often better moods and less comorbidities in the long run. But you do often still try to seek treatment, as especially there's a lot of stigma in today's society, a lot of difficulties that arise from sexual reassignment surgery. It's like a very long, very arduous, painful. The surgery is quite painful, whether it's a top or bottom surgery, whatever is being done. It's often very painful, and treatment can be helpful in that as well. Okay, now looking at sexual abuse. Obviously, these are all very illegal, very outside of the normal range, not an ethical way to behave at all. But only pedophilia is in the DSM at this time. I think incest should be. Rape, I think, can fall under some other disorders. But that's just my opinion, and they never asked me. Just know that pedophilia is the only one that is currently within the DSM. Okay, so as far as childhood sexual abuse, this happens in about 4 to 6% in the U.S. population. Prevalence definitely does depend on how they are defining sexual abuse and the reporting levels. A lot of, unfortunately, childhood sexual abuse is not yet reported. Only about 1.6% of people reporting actually report being a victim of childhood sexual abuse. There are obviously terrible, terrible short and long-term consequences when you are a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Unfortunately, it just totally changes your worldview of yourself and others, and your ability to cope in the world because you have been hurt in such a terrible, terrible way at such a young age. There's, I think, huge problems with the idea of childhood testimony. When you are the age of 18 and have most unfortunately been a victim of rape or sexual assault, you do not have to stand trial. The judge cannot make you look at your abuser or the person who did this to you. Like, you do not have to do that. You can elect to not be coming to court. But children are forced to do this. They don't have the same legal rights as adults do for whatever reason. It's incredibly traumatic a lot of the times that they have to face the abusers that have done this to them, and it's really, really, really sad. Also, something that's kind of interesting and something as a helping professional you have to be so careful of is this idea of recovered memories, in that, you know, it is likely that you do not remember a lot of your childhood, right? Like, before the age of 5, most people got nothing. And that's pretty normal. And even, you know, up to like 6, 7, 8, probably real fuzzy, right? It's not until like 9 or 10 where you're like, yeah, I remember that. But even so, it takes a lot of work. So with that, there's this idea of recovered memories that some helping professionals can make leading questions that can lead someone to believe that they are a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and in fact, that never actually happened to them. So something you have to be very, very careful of, because when someone potentially has that recovered memory that might have never happened, they can still have extremely negative, detrimental effects on their psyche once they believe that this could have possibly happened to them. So very important to keep that in mind. And then here we have, you know, those likely comorbidities for being a survivor of sexual abuse. Yeah.
I don't know if you said, why is it that babies have to go into court and not?
They just don't have the same legal rights as adults do. They just don't have that law in place. I don't know why. But
So like, is that if someone gets arrested for child abuse?
yeah. As in they're caught, they're being held trial. Yeah. Children are forced to come into.
Parents be able to say like,
Yes. If the judge mandates that the child has to be there and stand and, you know, give testimony, no, there's nothing you can do as a parent. Really sad. Yeah. You would hope that there is something you can do, but there's not. Okay. So let's just look at children's testimony in general, because it is often highly problematic anyway.
In what may become one of the biggest child molesting cases ever on record, 7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today on more than 100 counts of child molestation.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia Martin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
Finding out just what happened to the McMartin preschoolers in Manhattan Beach, California would spark a national media obsession.
A case which has shocked much of Southern California and caused a lot of parents to worry about the safety of their children,
setting off a panic around the country.
In alarming numbers, preschoolers have been exploited.
Could it be your child? The media blitz demonstrated unstinting belief that this had happened.
It was sensational and lurid and seemed to always be expanding.
1,400 children in this community have been ritualistically abused.
But were they? Decades later, while the McMartin case has been largely forgotten, its impact lives on.
The McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, as it looked when we photographed it discreetly just 3 weeks ago.
Local reporter Wayne Satz of KABC in Los Angeles broke the story.
It started out here in Manhattan Beach looking like an isolated incident. One mother noticed that her young son was having nightmares and difficulty sitting down.
teachers at this prominent Southern California preschool were accused of sexually molesting their young students.
Authorities now believe that at least 60 young children were victimized, and that the ultimate number could well be much greater.
Fueled by unskeptical press reports, the charges mounted on the evening news.
Those children, some of them as young as 2 years old, were photographed by the suspects.
Skinny porn was the primary purpose for the alleged sexual abuse of children.
Becoming more and more bizarre.
Some children allege that a living creature was sacrificed on the church's altar.
The truth about Satanism is they truly do use blood and they mix it with urine, and then they also use the real meat, the real flesh. This is what makes Satanism true. And this is what 1,200 molested kids in the city of Manhattan Beach have told the sheriff's department.
Most of the allegations had been made here at Children's Institute International, CII, a child abuse prevention center. At the request of prosecutors, CII social worker Key McFarland and her team had been videotaping interviews with the preschoolers.
Using puppets to encourage the children to reveal what happened, the therapists were able to unlock the horrible secrets of the McMartin School.
Virginia McMartin, her daughter, 2 grandchildren, and 3 other teachers were ultimately indicted on more than 300 counts of molestation.
2 South Bay preschools.
It wasn't long before accusations of abuse were being reported at 7 other daycare centers in LA County alone.
Investigators were at the Hickory Preschool in Torrance earlier today.
And then fear spread across the country, eventually targeting scores of daycare centers. But the story that initially fed the panic was not all it seemed. In the summer of 1983, a 39-year-old mother called the Manhattan Beach Police Department and accused McMartin teacher Raymond Bucky of molesting her 2.5-year-old son.
In the DA's office, all kinds of doubts developed, particularly about the fact that the mother of the first complaining child was psychotic. But they just kept on going. It was like the Titanic. It was like a roller coaster or a ship that just was out of control and couldn't stop.
The police released Bucky for lack of evidence. But then they sent out this letter to some 200 families, instructing them to question their children about sodomy, oral sex, and fondling.
What happens then is the parents start to talk to the kids, and then they start to talk to each other, and then they start to compare notes, and pretty soon, emotionally involved parents are engaging in leading and suggestive questioning of the child.
Kenneth Lanning worked with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit and consulted on the McMartin investigation.
Once these cases are contaminated, it's almost impossible to know with any degree of certainty what actually happened.
But the therapists at CII believed they knew what had happened. Based on their videotaped interviews, they said that more than 90% of the 400 preschoolers they talked to reported signs of sexual abuse.
Mr. Parrott, can you help Susie show us what happened to her?
The courts immediately sealed CII's interviews with the McMartin children. But the CII therapists shared demonstration videos like this one with the press and discussed their findings on television.
We have heard it 100 times before from children, the same things, the same games, the same descriptions.
I can't say that I ever saw a videotape where kids said this happened to me. Never of their own account, spontaneously.
The interviews are upsetting to read because essentially what happened is the therapist unintentionally coerced the children into fabricating stories of abuse.
Richard Beck wasn't even born when the McMartin story first broke in 1984. Fascinated by the panic that spread across the country, he has been researching and writing a book on the case for the last 2 years.
You have interviews that will start off with a therapist asking a child whether they'd ever played any naked games. At McMartin, this was a huge topic, was naked games. And the children initially say no. The therapist, though, didn't accept those answers. So then they repeat the question. And then they repeat it again. Eventually, the children realize that their interview is never going to be allowed to end until they start giving the interviewer the kind of answer that she wants to hear.
was obvious in the interviews that all kinds of techniques were highly suggestible, highly pressuring, and is capable of creating false memories of abuse in children, often permanent memories.
Key McFarland is no longer with CII. She declined our request for an interview. Dr. Stephen Ambrose has been working with children for more than 25 years and was at CII during the McMartin interviews.
I think our therapists, in many respects, started out being very careful about that back then, but as they became more persuaded that something had happened, there probably were some leading questions.
Dr. Ambrose says the McMartin case came about just as a new understanding of child sexual abuse was emerging.
It happened right at a time in the history of the field when we were just beginning to come to terms with the fact that child sexual abuse was a real phenomenon.
Wake up, America. This is your wake-up call.
People don't want to believe that young children have been molested. They much prefer to believe that it's not true.
We believe the children because once upon a time, we were the children and nobody believed us.
But that belief was sorely tested as investigators searched for physical evidence to back up what the children were saying.
No pornography that could be linked to the abuse that the children were describing has ever been found.
There should have been little animal carcasses, there should have been bodily fluids all over the preschool. They didn't have any of that.
And what about those early claims of satanic abuse?
There certainly have been mentally ill people who have gone out and killed people, quote, in the name of Satan. But there's never been any proof that there was any kind of satanic ritual abuse or satanic cult activity in a daycare center.
When I first got involved in this case, I'll be very honest with you, I tended to believe that this was going on. But eventually, the number of cases just kept growing and growing and growing. And at some point, I came to the realization, this many people can't be doing this to this many victims for this long, and not leaving any corroborative evidence behind. This doesn't work that way.
18 months after the McMartin investigation began, the case took a dramatic turn.
What we're left with at this point is that for 5 of the 7 defendants in the McMartin case, the evidence is so slim that it does not go beyond the mere accusation.
So in April of 1987, nearly 4 years after the first accusation was made, the case against the 2 remaining McMartin defendants, Raymond Buckey and his mother Peggy McMartin Buckey, finally went to trial. In court, medical evidence supporting the prosecution's case couldn't be established with any certainty. And although hundreds of children had been interviewed, in the end, only 9 testified.
After extremely lengthy cross-examination of children at the preliminary hearing, some parents decided that they would refuse to let their children participate any further.
Through it all, the Buckys remained steadfast about their innocence.
When I'm very nervous, I probably said some things that are not quite correct. Now, granted, I'll admit that.
Including Mr. Buckey, whether or not you molested children in this case?
No, Mr. Wood, I know that I did not molest children ever in my life.
The trial lasted nearly 3 years. And in January of 1990,
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find various defendants not guilty.
Children were never allowed to say in their own words what happened to them. I think that was crucial.
the jury could not agree on 13 counts against Raymond Buckey. So 6 months later, prosecutors brought him back to court. Once again, the jury was deadlocked.
There's legal necessity to declare a mistrial.
And with that declaration, one of the longest, most expensive criminal trials in U.S. history finally came to an end.
I'm glad it's over.
McMartin lead prosecutor Lael Rubin says that while she wishes the outcome had been different, the case brought about important changes.
Very young children who may or may not have been sexually abused have certainly been traumatized by endless hours of relentless examination.
Among them, a new understanding on the best way to interview children.
Who should do it, who should be present, how all of that should occur and be videotaped. So it really created a dialogue of examining the best way to talk to children who might be victims of crimes?
Nowadays, as opposed to back when the McMartin case took place, there's a very clear protocol about how to interview kids, and there's a very strong focus on avoiding leading questions of any kind. There's much more care taken to make sure that whatever the results are, they will stand up in court.
When the trial ended, the McMartin preschool was demolished. A laundry and dry cleaning store now sits in its place. After his acquittal, Raymond Buckey made a few television appearances, like this one on The Larry King Show.
What do you want to do? I want to be left alone. I've seen what the news media can do to people in a crowded situation, and I don't want to be in LA, and I want to be left alone. Simple life.
For Raymond Buckey's defense attorney, Danny Davis, the impact of the McMartin case should never be forgotten.
It brings into focus that our American culture can do harm to our children in the next generation, to win at all costs, to have a great publicity run, to jump the ratings and make it for a day. Those are all adult aspirations at the sacrifice of children.
Alrighty, y'all. We will pick it up next week. Thanks so much. Have a good week. And if you would like to talk to me about your